You were born. Everyone was. It's the one experience every single human being on Earth shares, and yet almost nobody thinks about how strange it actually is. The real answer is far stranger than you'd expect. Human birth almost shouldn't work. Start with a basic fact most people never learn. Compared to nearly every other mammal on the planet, human birth is unusually difficult, unusually dangerous, and unusually dependent on other people. A baby zebra can stand and run within minutes of being born. A human baby can't even hold up its own head. Something about the human birth process is fundamentally different from the rest of the animal kingdom, and that difference goes back millions of years. Here's where it gets interesting. Anthropologists Wenda Trevethan and Karen Rosenberg developed what's now called the obstetrical dilemma, a theory explaining why human birth became so uniquely difficult. When early humans evolved to walk upright on two legs, the shape of the pelvis had to narrow to support that new posture efficiently. At the same time, human brains were rapidly getting larger, which meant babies needed bigger heads to fit those growing brains. Narrower hips, bigger heads. Those two evolutionary pressures were pulling in opposite directions, and human birth is the awkward compromise that resulted. Because of this tight squeeze, human babies are born earlier, developmentally, than almost any other primate. Compared to a chimpanzee, a human baby is born in something closer to an unfinished state, with a brain that will nearly triple in size after birth instead of before it. This is why your baby self couldn't walk, couldn't feed itself, couldn't do much beyond cry and sleep. You weren't behind. You were exactly on schedule for a species that gave up some development time before birth in exchange for surviving the birth itself. Now here's the part that really should surprise you. Because of the shape of the human pelvis and the angle a baby has to rotate through to be born, human babies are typically born facing backward, away from the mother. This matters more than it sounds like it should. A mother physically cannot easily reach down, guide, and clear the baby's airway the way most other mammals can during birth. She can't see the baby's face as it emerges. Trevethan's research points to this specific anatomical quirk as the likely origin of one of the most universal human behaviors in existence. Assisted birth. Someone else being there. Think about that. Nearly every other species on Earth gives birth alone, instinctively, without help. Humans, because of pure anatomy, likely couldn't. Somewhere in deep evolutionary history, birth stopped being a solitary act and became a shared one, out of pure biological necessity. That single anatomical detail may be the ancient root of something you might not expect. Midwifery might be older than language itself. So what did birth actually look like practically for most of human history? Not lying flat on a bed, which is a relatively recent Western convention. Across most traditional societies studied by anthropologists, upright positions were the overwhelming norm. Squatting, kneeling, standing while holding onto a support, even hanging from an overhead branch or rope. Gravity did real work. These positions also widen the pelvic outlet slightly, giving the baby more room to navigate that tight, evolutionarily contested passage. There's a reason modern maternity care is quietly circling back to this. Medical researcher Ellen Hodnett, who studied labor support and delivery outcomes, found that continuous companionship and freedom of movement during labor were associated with shorter labors and fewer medical interventions. In other words, something ancient societies figured out through generations of lived experience is now being reconfirmed through modern clinical research. The old way wasn't primitive. In several respects, it was working with the body instead of against it. Pain management existed too, long before modern medicine. Different cultures developed their own approaches using local plants, some functioning as mild analgesics, others believed to speed labor along, others used more for psychological comfort and ritual reassurance than any measurable chemical effect. It's worth being honest here. Ancient pain relief wasn't remotely equivalent to modern anesthesia. Birth throughout most of human history was, physically, an intense and often dangerous experience. This isn't a story about ancient birth being easier. It's a story about how humans, generation after generation, built accumulated knowledge to manage something inherently difficult. And that knowledge was almost always held collectively, passed down through experienced women in a community, long before anything resembling formal medical training existed. Midwifery is sometimes described as possibly the oldest specialized profession in human history, predating agriculture, predating written language, predating almost every other form of organized human knowledge. Long before anyone was writing anything down, someone in every human community held the specific, hard-won knowledge of how to help another person through labor safely. This also explains something almost nobody connects to childbirth: human social bonds. If birth required assistance, then human groups needed enough social trust and cooperation for one person to reliably help another through one of the most physically vulnerable moments a human being can experience. Some researchers studying the evolution of human sociality argue that the demands of childbirth may have been one of the quiet evolutionary pressures pushing early humans toward tighter cooperation and social bonding in general. Not just for raising children after birth, which is an obvious cooperative act, but for the birth itself. Mortality was real and significant throughout most of human history, for both mothers and infants, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But mortality rates weren't uniform or static across all traditional societies either. Communities with strong midwifery knowledge, reliable social support, and accumulated generational experience often saw meaningfully different outcomes than communities without it. Knowledge mattered, it always has. There's a modern echo to all of this that might surprise you. Many contemporary hospitals have started reintroducing practices that look remarkably similar to ancient birth customs: upright birthing positions, continuous labor support from a doula or companion, functioning in many ways like the ancient assisted birth model Trevethan's research points back to. Freedom of movement during labor instead of remaining static. None of this is coincidence. Modern obstetric research increasingly supports what traditional birth attendants seem to have understood empirically for tens of thousands of years, refined slowly through observation, generation after generation, long before anyone could explain the underlying biology. So when you think about your own birth, or anyone's birth, there's a quiet through line stretching back further than most people realize. The narrow hips, the oversized head, the baby facing backward, the person who had to be there because biology essentially required it. Long before hospitals, before medicine as we understand it today, before written history itself, there was already a body of accumulated human knowledge dedicated entirely to this one universal, difficult, cooperative act. You were born. Everyone was. And the fact that you're here at all is the result of a specific evolutionary trade-off, an ancient anatomical quirk, and countless generations of people who learned, refined, and passed down exactly how to help another person through it. The real answer was never as simple as it seemed. It never has been.